glioblastoma, which is a very deadly brain cancer. And so people who have that really don't have a lot of options, and they're willing to be in the trial. They sometimes are hoping that just being in a phase 1 trial will help them, but that's not the intention. I mean, it can end up doing that inadvertently, but that's not the intent. And then your phase 2 and 3 trials are kind of looking more in depth at the effectiveness of the drug or the device that's being studied. Phase 2 and 3 trials are often under the purview of the FDA, and so there's a lot of regulations that go into that, where there is truly a code of federal regulations for human subject research. It falls under the FDA, and then also something called the Department of Health and Human Services. And so we researchers have to follow all of those regulations to make sure that we are keeping the trials as safe as possible, and that we're always looking at the risks versus the benefits, because we don't want to do harm to people. And so your phase 3 trials are your larger clinical trials. So phase 2, you might have anywhere from, let's just say, 20 people to 250 people, where they're looking, okay, we think this might work, let's do a smaller population and see if it's working in this population. Because these clinical trials are very, very, very expensive. It's, hundreds and hundreds of people. And so, again, A, you don't want to expose people to something that's not going to work, and B, you always have to keep cost in mind for these trials. Phase 3 trials are large. So I have kind of a little bit of each when I'm talking about our research studies, but those are going to be hundreds, if not thousands, of people that are participating in phase 3. That is when typically a pharmaceutical company or a biotech company thinks that the drug is going to work. They will enroll a much larger group of people. And then finally, you have the phase 4 trials, and those are your post-drug marketing studies. So they might want to look at a new indication for a drug. So when I first started research, my very first study was a phase 3 study of bevacizumab, which is now known as Avastin. And the study I worked on was for colorectal cancer. And it was a groundbreaking study. It brought Avastin to the market, and it is now used in so many different types of cancer, which is really, really cool. But yeah, phase 4 is usually you're looking at a new indication, or as you'll see, we have a phase 4 trial for pulmonary rehabilitation in an approved drug. So impact of clinical research for participants like yourselves. Why would you ever want to be in clinical research? So there are a number of reasons you may or may not want to be in research. The first reason I have listed here is the potential for direct benefit. So some of the trials that we do can have a direct benefit. They won't necessarily benefit you, but the hope is that they will. It also paves the path for future generations. I can't tell you how many people enroll in studies and say, even if it doesn't help me, it could help other people in the future. And so a lot of the research that is going on now it's the start. And then it might help your grandchildren, it might help your children, just lots of people can benefit from it. And then the drugs and devices that we have for these trials, they obviously have the potential, again, to prolong or save lives. So I'm going to talk a little bit about T.J. Sharp, who actually experienced that. And so if you've got a disease that is progressive or life-threatening, and you have access to a drug way before it hits the market, because it takes a long time to get these drugs to market, your life could actually be saved. So like some of the people that participated in that Avastin trial, I was responsible for the data for the tumor assessments. And so you have, for cancer, you've got complete response, which means remission basically. You have stable disease, and then there's partial response and progressive disease. And so what Avastin did was it greatly slowed and gave some of these people complete responses. It was incredible to look and see, wow, look at all of these people who are responding to this. And some of those people may not have survived their cancer had they not had that exposure to Avastin. With research, I do see a renewed sense of hope and strength sometimes in people. You know, you're kind of part of a team and part of a family when you're in research, and having that social support can be very critical. Investigational agents, whether it's a drug or, you know, cardiac device or any other type of device, can be, as some of you know, extremely expensive. And depending upon what type of issue you have, it can be difficult to get those medications. So most of those are given free of charge in clinical trials, so you have the benefit of not, at least for a period, worrying about the cost of that. Everyone who's in clinical trials is more closely monitored than when they're in usual care. So even if you have a study where it's, you know, primarily in conjunction with your regular care, basically I tell people, if anything goes wrong, you need to call me. And they do. People call. So if you're taking an investigation drug and you start having side effects, you call me. I then talk to the physician, and then the physician provides guidance on that. We might come in for a couple of extra visits, get some extra labs drawn, just to make sure everything is good. And so that can also have a positive outcome. And finally, yeah, the support network and being an inspiration to other people is a huge impact that participants can have. So this very first person I want to talk about, I would encourage all of you to go and try to find his YouTube. He's got, I think, a couple of things on YouTube, presentations. This man came, I guess it was like 3 or 4 weeks ago, I went to a conference at PCU. And he was our guest speaker. He, very young man, had just had his second child, and was told he had stage 4 melanoma and he had less than a year to live. And so he was like, oh no, I am going to live. I am going to find out everything I need to find out so that I can get on top of this and find out what is out there that can cure me. I want to be a father. I want to see my children grow up. I don't want to count months, was what he said. And just an incredible speaker. So he participated in 2 different immunotherapy clinical trials. The first one was not a success. And the second one, fortunately for him, was a success. So he started responding almost immediately. And he was diagnosed in 2012. It's 2019 now, and he is doing well. He is an inspirational speaker out there talking to lots of different groups of people. And again, you know, it doesn't work on everybody. It doesn't work on everybody. But the people it does work on can really change their lives around. So definitely try to find him. Caitlin, this is just something I pulled up from the NIH website, so you can kind of just Google in, you know, personal stories of clinical research. So she is someone who suffers from multiple sclerosis. And so she was in a clinical trial for a number of years and thought that the drug was working. But you don't get to find out when you're in a clinical trial if it's working until after the results are analyzed. And so she was kind of at the stage there where she was ending her participation in a clinical trial, and sometimes trials will give you kind of an open label extension of the drug, and sometimes they don't. And so she, was talking about her fear of no longer possibly having access to that drug. So even if it didn't work on most people, she had the perception that it was working on her. And then we have Dwayne. He was a former physician who wanted to become a healthy control for an Alzheimer's study. He had family history of Alzheimer's, and when he went into the study, he found out that he had mild cognitive impairment. So he now is, in the study learning more about himself. And then finally we have Jim H., who was diagnosed with IPF in 2013. He was in one of the 2 trials. There are 2 approved FDA drugs right now for IPF. There's pirfenidone, which is also known as Esbriet, and I know one of you at least is on Esbriet. And then there's nintedanib, which is called OFEV as well. So he was in one of those 2 trials, and so he had to have that drug before it came to the market, and it had a real positive impact on him. So again, I would encourage all of you, if you have any interest, to just listen to some of the stories of people. So if you want to find information about clinical trials, my number one, clinicaltrials.gov. It's a public website, and researchers are required to post their clinical trials there. So if a trial meets the definition of a clinical trial, so it's going to be pretty much all your phase 2 and phase 3 studies that are not exempt from FDA regulations, it's going to be there. And you can literally go in, do a search, just type in clinicaltrials.gov, do a search for whatever your disease is, and you will be able to see what studies are out there for you. And you might have 3, 4, or 5 different studies that you're interested in that aren't too terribly far from your home. Medical institutions, right? So of course you can ask your doctor. Some areas have local research companies. We have one that advertises all the time. It's Charlottesville Medical Research. And Richmond being a much larger area, I assume you all would have something like that. You can of course, go on the internet, do your Google search, and then just be listening on radio, TV, and looking in the newspaper. I had one study for asthma that we literally advertised in Valpak. Do you guys get the little Valpak coupons? Yeah. So we advertised in Valpak to get a larger group, and of course, support groups. So now I'm just going to briefly talk about our different ILD research that we've got, that I'm just highlighting. This is not every research study that we've got, but I'm highlighting the ones that are, hot right now with us. And so this very first study is called a study of natural progression of interstitial lung disease. This is a registry study, and Dr. Noth actually brought this study from University of Chicago with him. This is a genomic study where we are virtually asking everybody who comes into our clinic who has a form of ILD if they would be willing to be in the study. Yes?
Exactly what is ILD? If I have it, what's happening in my body?
So interstitial lung disease is basically, my understanding is scarring of the lungs, but I am not a physician, I am not a nurse. So I hoped to bring Kathy with me. She's our nurse coordinator, and she could speak much more eloquently, but that's what I think of. It's just scarring of the lungs, and your lungs are not working as well. Oxygen's not able to get in and out as easily. And there's so many, there's over 200 forms of ILD, so each one is a little bit different, and I just don't have the level of expertise to really speak well to it.